All right, it's 2:30. I'm going to start. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining me at this unusual hour. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Michelin, and I've been Chief of Operations of the 92nd Infantry Regiment in Clermont-Ferrand for the last couple of years. And the reason I'm here is that I've deployed with that regiment in Mali from October 21 to February 22. So we came home about 4 months ago. And we were stationed on a small outpost in Gossi and conducted operations both in the vicinity of the base on a daily basis with our Malian counterparts and also on longer range operations in the entire Gourma region in Mali. And my job as Chief of Operations there was to plan, conduct, and coordinate these operations, considering that we also had to defend our base at the same time and, as I've mentioned, conduct joint patrols in the city of Gossi and its surroundings with our Malian partners. And overall, the battle group formed by the regiment and its reinforcements conducted more than 100 patrols and spent around 50 days engaged in major operations over a 130 days tour. So it wasn't exactly a vacation. What I'm going to do today is give you a few end-user insights on the way we used what we call, small equipment of operational coherence. Mainly the small equipment that we used during the mission and that concurred to our combat effectiveness, which means night vision goggles and tactical level drones, unmanned aerial vehicles. So it's not as fancy as big new armored vehicles, but it's useful. All right, this is the outline I'll be following. Pretty simple. We have about 25 minutes. I'll make sure to leave 5 to 10 minutes to answer any questions you might have. Before we get to the details, a few words on context. I have to tell you that the individual gear that we have in the French Army today is generally excellent and robust. I spent 21 years in the Army so far, and I've witnessed firsthand the progress that we've made in small equipment. Things that don't seem like a big deal, but ballistic vests, combat backpacks, optics for rifles, shoes, that kind of stuff, it changed drastically and for the better over the last 10 to 15 years. And I'm an infantryman by trade, so none of this is not important to me. What I got from experience is that the closer you are to the ground and to the line of contact, and the more every little bit of equipment matters, especially when you have to carry it. And I also need to underline that now units in the French Army getting ready to deploy get this type of equipment in advance, which is also tremendously important because it means that we get to train with the equipment that we will actually use before the beginning of the mission. Again, the reason I'm mentioning this is that because it's not always been the case in the past, and the effort made is visible. For the purpose of brevity, these are the three items, the three pieces of equipment I'll be talking about, the ones that we use during the mission. The first one is the next generation night vision goggles. We call them Onix. And it seems like a minor piece of equipment. It's not, as I said, a new fancy armored vehicle or a rifle, but it doesn't make a difference, and it certainly did for us. The next generation NVGs that we got, they equipped about 10% of the battalion. And it doesn't seem much, but we gave them to our squad and platoon leaders, to our commando platoon, which has specific skills tailored around night operations, and most importantly to our vehicle crews, pilots and operators. And these NVGs, they offer a significant technological improvement. You see the side on the right of the slide, compared to the model that I've known my entire time in service for the last 20 years. Without getting into specifics, basically what they do is that they provide excellent visibility and perception of the terrain, relief and stuff like that. and it's quite an update for our pilots. Another bonus is that now with these night vision goggles, you can use them to read a map or to use the screen of a tablet using topography software, which, once again, wasn't the case 10 years ago. That kind of stuff used to be science fiction when I was a lieutenant. So we were pretty excited. I'll give you an example. During one operation, we were planning to infiltrate the entirety of the battle group towards an area known to shelter terrorists. It was close to the village and the famous cliffs of Ombory. And the maneuver began with a feint in the northern direction to have the enemy and its scouts believe that we were headed back to our base in Gossi. And then, at night, we jumped 20 to 30 kilometers south in order to cordon and search the area at first light. It implied an off-road movement of 3 to 4 hours in pitch black with the entirety of the battalion conducted flawlessly, heavy cargo vehicles and everything. And this wouldn't have been possible without our pilots being equipped with these NVGs. You have to imagine being at the wheel of the 30-ton truck, driving with no light, no moon, crossing dried wadis and fields of rock and using mostly GPS, so screens, to get where you need to go. And it worked. The enemy had no idea where we had gone the next morning. 50 vehicles and 300 people just vanished in a few hours. It's pretty hard to surprise these guys when you carry 10 days worth of supplies with you and you're 100 kilometers from the nearest base. But we did. We also used these NVGs to gather intelligence in the city of Gossi, in which we conducted regularly night patrols, namely around buildings that we suspected shelter weapons cache. And we had one pretty serious suspicious one. Serious enough to send about 60 people across the city at midnight to make sure that this specific building wasn't a weapons cache. The scout element was armed by our commando platoon, and they got us through the city without anyone noticing. We cleared the house. It was empty. Well, not empty, but it didn't have mortar shells or stuff like that inside. The tip we got was wrong. We put everything back in place and went back to base before anyone figured out we were in there. Once again, couldn't have done it, couldn't have been as discreet with old night vision goggles. I don't know if you have experience of this, but I can tell you, dismounted infantry at night is loud, very loud. So these NVGs, they represent the first updates towards the entry into service of binocular NVGs in the coming years. And I found out, since we came home, that they have benefited from an accelerated process to get to the field as quickly as possible, which is a good thing, because from the perspective of a combat unit, the next desirable step is more of these, so that we can get that same capability upgrade for dismounted operations by night at the battalion level. Next, I'll move on to UAVs. This one, I'll mention quickly. It's a Black Hornet. It's a micro UAV that infantry platoons have been using for a couple of years now. Its specifications, short range, small size, discrete, simple but complete set of optics, render it tailored for specific actions, mostly in urban terrain. In Mali, we didn't use it much because there isn't that much of urban terrain to operate on. However, it's a very useful asset to gather intelligence of inside of a compound. Like you have these big farms with high walls and stuff like that, and you're trying to figure out what's inside, and you don't have clearance to break the door and kick the door and enter. So you use this small drone to figure out whatever the enemy is doing, the enemy or the people in the house. It's very easy to use, and the plus is that it requires little to no deconfliction with other 3D assets because it's basically at ground level all the time. What we did is that we used it in Intel Squad's configurations. You have the drone operator working alongside the 2 snipers in an infantry platoon, and mostly in villages or built-up areas to scout behind walls. You cordon the site, you have dismounted infantry patrol outside the houses, and then you get your snipers on higher ground with the drone operator, and they can tell you what happens behind the walls. It also can be used for defensive purposes due to its thermal sights, very useful in the desert to patrol around our temporary bases during the night. But we didn't use this specific drone for that because we had a better suited UAV to do this, which brings me to my next and final item. All right. The NX-70. This I can tell you about. The upper left photo is a stock photo, but the other two are pictures taken during the mission. So this other drone, it's a mini UAV, so a bigger size, and we deployed a few of them in Mali, usually at the company level. Its longer range combined with vertical takeoff and landing rendered it especially useful. It was somewhat limited by its range. The weather conditions shortened the range and autonomy of UAV systems in Mali, which shouldn't surprise anybody. What we observed is that we could send them up to a range of 2.5 kilometers, and they had an autonomy of 45 minutes, which is pretty good. And so we used these drones for 3 main missions. The first one was the protection of our temporary bases in the desert during long-range operations. So when you get on a long-range operation, you do your thing during the day, and then at night, basically, you regroup and set up on positions that are easy to defend and suitable for helicopter delivery and or evacuation. So what we do, you've seen Western movies with the carts like the settlers. They do that in the prairie at night. We did that with our armored vehicle. We formed a square, defended the perimeters, and then set shop inside to perform maintenance on the vehicle, take care of our gear, eat, have food, and get some sleep. And above this temporary base, what we did is we deployed one of these little boys with a cable to have it sustained permanently, and it hovered around the base. It was especially useful at dusk because that's when the scouts, the enemy scouts, try to gather information to figure out where we are, and at dawn before we left, because that's the moment that they're trying to figure out where we go and possibly attempt to I don't know, put an ID in our tracks or stuff like that. So that was the first mission. The second mission we used them for was intelligence collection after indirect fire attacks on our FOB. In January, we were subjected to several harassment attacks by a 60mm motor crew that set shop inside the city of Gossi. So what they did is that they used bikes, they mounted their mortar in a couple of minutes, fired a couple of rounds in our general direction, and then left immediately afterwards. And so when you get an IDF attack, the first thing you do, you get your radar that sets the siren so everybody goes under shelter. Then you have the FOB defense platoon that reinforces the positions to make sure that it's not a complex attack. Then you have the quick reaction force platoon that gets inside the vehicles to get ready to deploy to whatever the threat might be. But by the time you do that, your 2 guys with their mortar, they're gone they're long gone. So what we did, we took the habit, I say took the habit because it happened 4 or 5 times over 3 weeks. What we did is we took the habit of deploying an NX-70 immediately after the attack, and we would even operate that drone from the shelters. Like at the same time when we're trying to figure out that, okay, no rounds landed inside the base or nobody's injured and stuff like that. And then we immediately send the drone to wherever the shots came from. And we did that because it also prevented the enemy to redeploy that same mortars a couple of blocks further and try to renew its attack while everybody's exiting the shelters. Again, small stuff, unsexy stuff, but when you're the one under the shots, it's pretty useful. And the third and final mission is the one that's pictured on the slide. It was to observe and direct mortar fires, especially during long-range operations. We used illumination and explosive rounds on various occasions. When we stopped for the night or for some longer phase during the day, mostly as a dissuasive measure. The idea was to convey the message that, hey, we can see you wherever you are, and we can get shells on your face wherever you are, so don't do anything stupid. And it was a good drone for this because it has excellent optics, first to clear an area to make sure that there's nobody where you're planning to shoot, because the desert can be a surprisingly busy place with livestock and people and nomads, and then to observe and guide mortar fires. I'll give you an example, and then we'll reach the conclusion, and we'll have 5 minutes for questions. At some point during an operation, I think it was in the very early days of January, because yes, we celebrated New Year's Eve in the desert. We sent camp somewhere, and we were planning to head west in the next morning. But in order to get west, we had to go through what we call a mandatory passage point. Basically, some points on the terrain that you have to go through. There's no bypass possible, which makes it very predictable and tend to attract enemy ID experts. And we knew we had to get through this, so what we did is we fired a few illumination rounds at night above this spot, along with a couple explosive rounds, and then the next morning, right as we were resuming movement towards the spot, we fired another volley of explosive rounds. And we did that because we wanted to send a message. And the message was, see that spot right there? That's where we're going to go. Yes, that's where we're going to go. Don't even think about doing something stupid. And we could do that because we had this little machine to observe and guide mortar fires. The way ahead from my position for this type of system is to be able to operate in the 3 to 5 kilometers range. So about twice the current range, the one that we observed in Mali. Because even in the desert or in adverse weather conditions like extreme cold or extreme heat, and 3 to 5 kilometers is roughly the dimension of an area of interest for an infantry company from an intelligence perspective. And we know that we have other systems on their way that should increase the current capabilities to cover this gap. All right. Some final thoughts. The first thing is tactical UAV systems capacities are overlapping, but they allow for a good tactical coverage. You have the Black Hornet at the platoon level for a very small sized punctual objective like a house or a compound. You have the NX-70 at a company level for extended area defense and to guide mortar fires at the company level. And then we had another drone system that was in the hands of the artillery detachment of the battle group, the SMDR, which I'm not covering because it's not my agenda today. And with this one we used for intelligence collection and future ops orientation. Basically, to each tactical level you have different needs, different specifications, and different platforms. And we found out with all these three assets that we had enough internally to orient and decide on our courses of action without having to rely systematically on operative level assets like the big fancy drones, the Reapers and stuff that you can request, but they also can choose not to give them to you. From a capability development perspective, second thought, the short loop feedback is essential to ensure that the lessons that we learned from the field are implemented in time. And again, with the privilege of a few years of perspective, I found out that this has generally improved since the days I was a young lieutenant. Third lesson is the technology powering this type of equipment is usually fairly accessible. I mean, it's not science fiction anymore. You can find civilian level drones fairly easily. They have excellent day and night optics. What sets military grade equipment apart is its durability and ability to operate in degraded conditions. And the desert in Mali has been an incredible field of experimentation in that regard. From an end user perspective, what I believe is that imperfect but quickly is a better option than perfect but too late. Some of the systems we operated in Mali were in the late stages of development and only had temporary authorizations of entering service. But we found that dealing with some mishaps, especially with UAVs that were not entirely 100% reliable when we used them, was worth the added value to our capacity. And on this note, this concludes my presentation. and we have 5 minutes. I'm ready to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Hello. Yeah, you slightly touched my actual question. The question is, what was the actual real life lifetime of these UAVs? Like, usually it's like a week, or of course it's how many times you use it, or
it depends. The thing is, we had the one that we used the most was probably the SMDR. And it was a fairly young system, so it was hard to get replacement parts. The NX-70, we spent 4 months, 4.5 months over there. We brought our drones with us, and we brought them back with us. So it's pretty enduring. Well, you're not using them like 6 hours per day for 4 months and a half. So I don't have verified information to answer your question, but they're fairly durable. No. Oh, no. You're, well, we're the French Army. We operate on scarcity. So we bring stuff back. Yeah, and we reload it and we maintain it, but we don't, yeah, it's not disposable, even the small ones.
Ryan Nodali, Royal Artillery. I had a question. I had a bit of a spat with Dr. Jill Sargent Russell about NVGs, and her point was that the tactical advantage of them is offset by what you pay in terms of like neck injuries because of the weight on helmets. Now, I'm an advocate of them because I understand the tactical advantage they provide. But do you know if there are any plans in the future to reduce their weight or to make it more bearable?
What I've been told, because I'm not an expert, is that weight is the reason that French Army is the reason why the French Army chose to have monocular NVGs, because binocular NVGs would induce additional weight that offset the advantage they provide. It's all a matter of compromise. I'm a senior officer now, so my days of carrying an NVG, a pair of night vision goggles, and my helmets are behind me, so I wouldn't try to steal the thunder from any real field perspective. What I think is that it's how you use them that makes a difference. And it's not the answer to everything, but on specific operations like the one I've mentioned, for examples, they were essential. Anyone?
Just one last question. Your account of having a tethered drone on your circle is quite interesting to me. I know that the French Army has also deployed helium-filled balloons with camera systems in Mali. Which system do you think is better?
As always, it depends. We had one tethered balloon above the base. And we found out, because we were able to gather intelligence in the city with human assets, that this balloon up in the air was very dissuasive, because some of the enemy thought that it was able to see way farther than what it was actually useful for. So we used to deploy it even when the optics were in maintenance, just because seeing it up there was dissuasive. But it didn't always work. So I think when you figure out what are the times favorable to an indirect fire attack, which is usually at dusk or at dawn, either a balloon or a tethered drone can work. Tethered drones are very useful in the desert because it's just a drone with a cable A balloon is more suited for bigger size compounds defense. Il est -5. All right, thank you.